All right, sorry about that, everybody. I can see the chat, so if you have any questions as things come up, I will try to take them if I can. Otherwise, I'll definitely have time for questions at the end. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully it's over lunch for you today. It is for us, so we're excited to take a break from the regular day and show you a little bit about what we know here at Headway about working on Ruby on Rails apps inside of Vim and Tmux and trying to tighten the Agile feedback loop on code coverage, quality, and style. So this is going to teach you how to run your tests locally and get coverage metrics right in Vim. It'll show you which lines were hit, which were missed. And additionally, let's walk you through this document here. I'll make this available afterwards. This is what I'm going to be working through and pasting in some code. I'm walking you guys through a couple different projects to demonstrate how things work. So after we get Vim set up to do local testing with Cadre and Vim Legend, and Simple Cov doing the heavy lifting on the background, then we're going to talk about Rubocop and getting Rubocop executing with Syntactic inside of Vim locally to be able to get your style guide right in line while you're writing code. Definitely a lot better than 35 hound comments on a PR. It's nice to be able to address those locally. Also talk about how we can get an existing code base up to snuff with Rubocop's autocorrect feature and a couple tweaks to the different configurations to quiet down some of the noise of a couple of the sillier choices that they've made, in my opinion. And we'll talk about code climate, how you can run code climate analysis locally, both at the command line and inside of Vim. And finally, we'll look at everything on a pull request. Have a couple pieces of documentation here for getting set up. I won't take the time to do all of that. I'll just show you these screenshots, and then we will take a look at a PR. We'll open one, take a look at a PR on GitHub and see how it looks. And at the end, hopefully we can see Hound and Code Climate sort of doing the same thing. And it'll be an interesting conclusion, I think. Putting this together, I didn't know if Code Climate could live without Hound, and now I'm pretty happy that I think that it will be able to. So we'll get through all this stuff, and hopefully you guys will have a little bit better toolkit at your disposal locally. So to get things kicked off, I'm going to open up Vim here, and I have a setup with Tmux and Vim that allows me to view my terminal on the right and my code on the left. I like having NerdTree open here as well. And this just lets me see my code. This is the file that we were just looking through, the markdown file. And it lets me edit things locally right at the command line or run git commands, that kind of thing. So you'll see that as we work through some of the code here. Oops. All right, this is going to be the code base that we use when I show Rubocop. But to get started, I wanted to just walk through a new Rails app. I apologize, I just need to get my bearings here. So that's going to be that one. So I'll just launch Tmux, create a split, and this is the Cadre demo. So all this does is walks us through these first couple of steps here. So I didn't want to have to wait for bundle and all that stuff. So we've got a new fairly empty repo. I added Rails, just the standard Ruby on Rails install there, SQLite and all that fun stuff for the database. And now I added a Cadre demo gem set and Ruby 2.3.1 version file. I used to do this in the gem file, specify these things, but kept being a pain, so I've sort of reverted back to these hidden Ruby gem set and Ruby version files to track those things. And then added a couple of dependencies that I like to use typically. RSpec is my testing framework of choice. Bybeg comes now with default Rails. So we added Spring commands RSpec, which will just allow us to run RSpec through Spring, which comes with Rails by default. And we'll talk about some gotchas there with regard to SimpleCov in a bit. Then RSpec Rails, that has a dependency of RSpec, of course, so we just need to specify this one thing and it'll pull it in. Same with Factory Girl. And then in the test group, we're adding SimpleCov, require false, so that we can run that without having it double require. And then the Cadre gem. I'm not exactly 100% sure how to say that. I think it's a word that they used to name their gem after, but we'll call it Cadre. So if we go back here, these are the steps we've completed. So we are up to making our RSpec install work correctly. So let's generate our RSpec install. All right, a couple new files. Spec Helper is what we need to edit. So we'll place this configuration at the top of Spec Helper. And I'll tell you what this does. So we're checking for an environment variable of coverage. And we want to only run SimpleCov if coverage is true. So we want to export the coverage equal true variable in order to get SimpleCov to take effect inside of RSpec. And there's a little hint here if you do run your tests on Circle CI, some of this configuration can be helpful, but we won't need it here locally. I'm looking at this sideways because I'm pretty sure this needs to be true. We'll see how it goes. All right, so we've got Spec Helper configured. The next thing is to get SimpleCov configured. If you remember, inside of our gem file, we have SimpleCov added as a dependency. And SimpleCov is what runs, Cadre is what formats it, and then in a minute we'll get down to the Vim setup that brings it all into Vim for viewing. So let's grab this. We're going to add this as a .simplecov file at the root of our directory. So we'll just paste that in there. So if environment coverage equals true, we want to require SimpleCov. And this is some configuration that I've tweaked a little bit over the years. We have to add an additional formatter in here. We usually get the HTML formatter for free. There's a Cadre SimpleCov Vim formatter that we also have to add, so you can have multiple formatters. That way we can view both the HTML version and the Vim version. You can add a minimum coverage if you want. It'll just yell at you, hey, you don't have 95% test coverage. And then the command that we're going to be running primarily is RSpec. You can set this up to run under Cucumber as well, but that's beyond the scope of this particular webinar. All right, so let's look at the Vim setup that you need in order to have your tests report locally. You need to bundle in or install however you like this Vim Legend plugin. We also need, if you want to be able to view the tests like I do over here in the right tmux pane, a Vim plugin called Vimix. So add that in. And then in your Vim RC, here's some Cadre configuration. So it'll be able to tweak some colors. The map that we use to expose the tests, liter CV for coverage, is kind of the mnemonic there that I use. Then some Vimix configuration to use the nearest pane of 33% of my width, and we want the orientation to be horizontal, so it will give me a vertical split on the right. And then this is a little bit of funkiness where in order to run one or more RSpec tests, you do liter T or liter capital T to run a focused one, and that will run the test and it'll determine whether or not we're using Cucumber or RSpec. It will export coverage equal true if we are trying to run with coverage, which you can see here is liter C. And whether or not we're focused, it will be able to figure all that out for you, and you can run your tests either without coverage, which is a little bit faster and easier, or you can run a particular file with coverage with leader capital C, and we will show how all that works in a second. So the coverage equals true export is necessary so that we can run the RSpec suite through bundle exec. Typically, if you want it to be very fast and you're iterating across a single file, running individual tests with leader T or leader capital T if you're focusing, it's very quick to run those tests if you're using Rails and Spring. But because Spring keeps Rails loaded or portions of it loaded and it reloads things incrementally as you save different files, coverage is never accurate if you run RSpec through Spring. And I've done a lot of looking online to try and figure out a way to make it work. I got close a couple of times, but I think it was just luck, and it wasn't 100%. It was like, oh, I'm getting 95%. Why can't all of it work? And really, the maintainers of a few different gems all chimed in and said, look, you just can't have this work through Spring. You just have to use bundle exec. So I created this sort of setup to abstract away a lot of that need. So let's get to some tests. I'll show you this in real life. So let's generate a new person model with a first name and a last name. Pull open some of these files here. All right. So I use rails.vim to be able to navigate through the project. And you can see there, I opened up the person model and then did :AV, and that brought up my test in a split. So now I can hit leader T and it'll run this test. Migrate our database first. Okay, so we've got a failure. We don't have anything implemented here. So if we do this test driven, what do we want to happen? Let's create a display name method. And we could string interpolate that, but typing all those curlies is harder sometimes than just concatenating a space. So if we run this file, we should see it fail. Undefined method display name, okay? And I'll do leader CV, no coverage file, it says down there in the lower left-hand corner, which makes sense because I ran this test just with leader T. And if we come over here and watch and go up a little bit and see how it executed, it runs clear, and then RSpec, spec models, person spec. So we're not exporting that coverage variable properly, and it doesn't actually run through bundle. So you can't just do bundle exec RSpec. That won't work either because we're guarding everything with that coverage environment variable. So I'll do leader capital C. And you can see now, coverage report generated. And here, coverage equals true, bundle exec RSpec. So because this is such a small app, it still runs really fast. And you can see we've got a fully covered model here. No implementation, just a green check mark next to the model. So let's add a method. Missing plus. So we can see the method name was incorrect. All right, so now we have a fully passing test. But I didn't run it through coverage. There we go. So now you can see that this particular method is covered, it's hit. If I comment this out or just exit out and I run the suite with coverage again, or this file at least with coverage, and I come back over here, instantly you can see that this line is no longer covered. The method definition automatically gets executed when RSpec loads the file up, so that shows coverage as does the class definition, but the particular internal bits of this method don't get hit. So that's showing coverage inside of Vim. Now let's take a look back at our guide. The other thing, just real quick, that we can do, let's take a look at our coverage file itself. So this is where we sit for all files and coverage. That's because I only ran the one particular file through RSpec, but if we go up here and we just say bundle exec RSpec and we don't specify anything, then it will run the whole suite. And we can see we get a little bit better coverage there. So we've got our models are 100% covered. A couple things aren't. Application controller, there's not much to do there, but if you just generate a spec for it, then it'll show 100% coverage for that as well. But that is showing coverage and hiding it with leader CV, comma, for me, in Vim. All right, so let's jump ahead to getting going with RuboCop. So there's a few things you need to do to show RuboCop inside of Vim. First, you need to install the Syntactic bundle and add these settings to your Vim RC. Some additional maybe things you haven't seen before, even if you've run through Syntactic's Vim Setup. Did some tweaking here to allow Cucumber to execute outside of the context of the actual Rails app running so that we could get undefined step definitions much more quickly. That isn't really part of this, but I'll be putting a blog post up later that talks a little bit more about how you integrate Cucumber with your RSpec and keep seeing all these nice things inside of the editor. Set the warning symbol here to a little warning and change our checker to be both MRI, so it gives us just standard Ruby errors, and then also RuboCop. I left this commented out here, syntactic debug equals 1. You don't want it on. Usually it's very noisy, but if you are having issues getting syntactic to automatically evaluate your file upon save, it's extremely useful to have that turned on, and it can really help you figure out what's going wrong. So in order to use RuboCop inside of Vim, you need to set a couple things up in the gem file. We need both the RuboCop, and I like the RuboCop RSpec gem as well, require false for both of these. And the RuboCop gem needs to be a very specific version. You have to kind of, well, at least if you want to use Hound, which I'm thinking I'm going to just start using Code Climate without Hound anymore, and we'll get to that in a bit. But you always had to use, you used to have to sync the RuboCop gem release with the one that Hound had the most recent version of. It was always kind of a pain. You're always a little bit behind. RuboCop would come up with something cool and new, and Hound would be yelling at you about it because you might be able to use it locally, but not on Hound. So it's best to just kind of hold your local environment back to sync with Hound so that it gives you the same errors locally in Vim with Syntactic as it does on the PRs. That's always frustrating when you think you're good and you get a PR with Hound yelling at you with something else. All right, so let me do this quick. Okay, so if we run RuboCop after getting it set up, I should point out this is the self-starter project. which is a roll your own crowdfunding app. It's pretty old, but I'm trying to simulate what you would maybe do if you were coming in for a rescue project or a project that hasn't been maintained in a while. You want to get it up to snuff. You want to run it through RuboCop. You want to get the team committing to a shared style guide so you can make incremental progress. And so this is the particular code repository that I grabbed. It's open source. It's smaller in size, so it was nice to be able to show a couple of the different files, and it had quite a few issues. So we've got 256 offenses. Let's scroll up and look through a few of these. Let me make this a little bigger. So you can see lots of stuff about single quoted strings, tons of single quoted string issues, empty lines at the end of empty extra lines, final new line missing, lots of different stuff. This would be very tedious and to clean up manually, and it would be very annoying to have to deal with all of those issues on every single pull request. So we get lots of offenses. But if we run RuboCop autogen config, we can pull down, or we can let RuboCop generate for us a config file called RuboCop to do. And if we change the RuboCop to do to regular RuboCop, you can see I had my old one that was not version controlled in there. Oh, this is not exactly where I want to be. 1 second. Here we go. Let's generate the config file over here. Okay, so here is all of the things that it found. Offense count 1, offense count 1, offense count 49. So you can see kind of where your hotspots are, what the issues are, and this is the to-do file. So it's saying, hey, you can look through these issues, you can sort of implement them one at a time as you wish if you want to go incremental, but let's just say, let's change this to be the RuboCop YAML file and run RuboCop again. And look, no offenses. Well, that's okay. This is now what you would do to say, yes, I want to enable some of these. It's saying exclude all of these, enabled false, right? So instead of doing that, if we just delete all of the configuration, we come back here, back to our 256 offenses. So what I'd like to do is get a bit of a config going here. So metrics line length, let's just add that single thing to our config and see where it gets us. We had 256 offenses, now we're at 207. That's pretty cool. All right, so style documentation. By default, RuboCop wants to have you put a document comment, a documentation comment at the top of every single model file and every single Ruby class. I don't think that's very conventional with Rails. 195 we're down to now. Oh, right. I missed one step. So let's comment these out here and let's run. There are quite a few cops that can be fixed if you autocorrect. So let's run this RuboCop autocorrect and see what happens. So 251 offenses were just corrected. And if we take a look at what was corrected, it can correct things like single quoted strings, use 2, not 4 spaces for indentation, inconsistent indentation, lots of nice stuff. It converts all the old 1.8 hash rocket syntax to the new 1.9 plus syntax. Great stuff. So if we just look at getX here, See some of the stuff that it's fixing here, the hash rocket, some alignment stuff, going double and instead of A and D. If not, it converts to unless, single quoted strings all over the place. This is great. Now you'll see though, it's modifying some stuff in the DB folder, which isn't great, and script Rails as well. We usually like to leave those things alone. So let's take these for, oops, discard those particular changes. It's always good. I like to pull up GitX or the GitHub desktop app or some sort of local tool to look through these and just make sure that it didn't automatically change the meaning of your code or introduce a bug. I've seen it only 1 or 2 times, but it was very subtle, and it was good to catch. It does nice stuff like add the underscores in there for numbers, which makes them easier to read. All right, so back to our RuboCop config. With all those things corrected and this minimal setup, we're down to 63 offenses. But it's still yelling at us about the database stuff. And we don't want to autocorrect that again. So let's take a look at how we can exclude things. All right, so we want to run all cops. We want to exclude from any analysis all database folders and any files in the script folder. This display cop names is nice, and we'll see that when we get to the syntactic portion, where it will tell you exactly which cop you're violating, the specific name of it, so that if you want to look that documentation up online, it's a lot easier than just Googling for the error message itself. We're sort of cheating here where we're saying, yeah, we kind of don't care about line length. That's fine for now. I like to fix those incrementally as I go. And then we don't want the documentation. So let's take a look at what we get here. 9 offenses. That's a little bit better. So we can take a look and see what some of these are. So too many lines, ABC size, method length. We should raise a specific kind of exception. Another ABC size and metrics length. We should use loop instead of while, begin, end, or until. And then a few issues with the specs as well. So that's a whole lot better with a pretty minimal config. I think those issues we could go through and fix before doing any work on this legacy code base. All right, so let's take a look at some code in line. Let's see here where some of our files are. We've got prefill order controller. So now all I had to do was write the file, and all these different S for syntactic issues show right in Vim. And down here you can see metrics/ABC size. That was the bit in the configuration that said, show me the cop name. And then here's the error message. Assignment branch condition size for prefill is too high. So ABC is assignment branch condition. So we're doing too much in this method is what it's saying. And then we've got another one here. If you put your cursor on that line, you'll see style raise args, provide an exception class, and a message is an argument to raise. So let's leave those in there. And let's clean up our specs a little bit. So if we install a gem called transspec, this helps you convert old RSpec to new RSpec. And if I run it with the -F, it will do all the conversion even though I had a dirty working directory, not clean commit status. So now if we run RuboCop, down to 7 offenses. It fixed a couple of issues with the specs there. So order RB is giving a syntactic error right here. And this is a pretty easy thing to fix. So here's the new code. It does not give an error. Should generate a UUID. We could run that test. And that passes. So our new code works. That's good. So down to 6 offenses. A couple more in the order model here. We can see this one's yelling at us a bit. Well, I don't really want to clean it up, and or maybe it's valid to just have it be this long. You know, in this particular case, I don't think that I would want to extract this method or do anything weird to it. So in those cases, you can ignore certain cops. So if we ignore the metrics ABC size and the metrics method length, it will stop yelling at us here. Down to 4 offenses. And let's take a look at pre-order helper. What is it mad about in here? This end is not properly aligned. Okay, it's pretty easy. So you can see I saved the file, syntactic warning goes away, and we're down to 3 offenses. Great. So now let's see if we, make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. All right, commit the changes locally. All right. Now you can run the code climate analysis, which does some static analysis, some security checks with things like Brakeman. You can run that on a pull request, and you can run it in their web UI as well. But it's kind of a little bit of friction if you're putting your pull request up there before you know what all the issues are. Again, I mentioned getting 35 plus hound comments on a PR. That's definitely happened to me on client projects, and it just looks a little silly to have to go fix all those things or tweak a setting and redeploy and everybody gets notified. So it's nice to be able to look locally at what's going on. So it's a little bit of a difficult setup to get Docker running locally on OS 10. This is honestly the first time I've tried to do anything with Docker. And if you go to the code climate repo, they just say install, you have to get Docker, and they recommend doing it through Docker machine. Several sort of steps you have to go through that take you to various different places. It's not very straightforward. So I put them in order here. These are all the things that you need to do. Download Docker for Mac. It's just a GUI application that's running right here. Then you need to install Docker machine, and you can install either bash or ZSH completion scripts. And again, I'll make this file available so you'll have it. And then you can proceed with the actual steps to get code climate running locally. Docker pull code climate, and then brew tap into these two things to wrap what would otherwise be a pretty gnarly execution every time. This guy right here you would have to run. So they wrap that for you with just code climate directly as an executable, and you can run that. All right, so now if we run code climate analyze, I don't have a code climate file yet. That's nice of it to tell me what to do. So we'll do code climate init. Okay, so it generated a code climate YAML file, which is the thing we can use to configure it, and a couple of different lint configurations as well. CSS, coffee, ES lint ignore, and ES lint RC. So we can see those over here. Here's the default code climate YAML file. It's going to run Brakeman, bundler audit, which tells you if your gems are out of date, CSS lint, coffee script linting, and then it'll check for duplication, whether or not you've copied and pasted methods around your code a lot, and it will warn you, hey, duplicate code found here, maybe you should extract that to a common place. It'll run ESLint and check for any fix-me's that were left in the code. And finally, it will run Rubocop. And this is the piece that previously, it's either new or I hadn't had it working before. And this is the thing that allows me to replace Hound with code climate entirely. It's pretty cool. And then we've got some different defaults that we can tweak. If we don't need these, you can delete any of the ones that you don't need and exclude some certain paths. You can see they exclude DB for us here, script. That's nice. Spec Maybe you might want them to analyze RSpec. I didn't look into whether or not they do that. I know locally with RuboCop RSpec you can do it, so it's good to at least have that. I'm not 100% sure if Code Climate can analyze your spec files or not. So now that we have all of this in place, we can run Code Climate locally. So starting analysis, running Brakeman, bundler audit. This is the same steps that you see when you're waiting when you put a repo up online. You're waiting for its analysis. The duplication is the piece that takes the longest. Had this hang up on me earlier today, ran for 900 seconds and then quit. Usually it's pretty quick. There we go. ESLint, fix me, and RuboCop. So we can see 55 issues. Pretty good output. I like this output. Shows a lot of problems with gemfile.lock. These come from bundler audit. You can also run bundler audit locally on your machine without having to run through Code Climate if you like. They're fixed. It tells you what to do when you run it locally. It just says, hey, upgrade to a patched secure version of Rails, for instance, and other gems can get vulnerabilities in them as well. Bundler audit tries to stay on top of that. Some of our clients fail their build if bundler audit does not pass without any output. So found similar code in one other location. That's the duplicate check. Line exceeds maximum allowed length for coffee lint. And then here we can see again some more RuboCop stuff over on the right here. Hopefully that's showing up well for you guys on the stream. Metrics, method length, and ABC size, the same stuff we saw before. So it's giving us those in the pre-order controller. It's giving us those same warnings that we were able to get by running just straight RuboCop at the command line and also through Syntastic. And then this Brakeman issue, possible unprotected redirect. So it's nice to see all these. Ideally, you should fix all of these issues before continuing on a project. If you join a project and it has issues and they're not addressing them, definitely get those going before you issue any new PRs. Otherwise, it just adds a lot of line noise to the PRs when you're trying to get features in. So just get like a cleanup PR, do these things, and then the actual feedback you get on a new feature PR will be much more actionable. Okay, so we can run it locally, but what about through Vim? Let's take a look at that controller. So we can see here are the two Syntastic issues, but maybe there's some other security problems that Syntastic and RuboCop don't analyze specifically. Maybe you need Brakeman for that. Well, you can run Code Climate Analyze, and let me just tab complete this. We've got current file, opened files, and project. And I have an open issue with the Code Climate Vim project. Just filed it. Oh, I need the GitHub one though. So hopefully I can get an answer for this. I couldn't figure out exactly what the differences are because when I would just choose analyze current file, I would think it would only give me results from the current file, but it also shows a handful of the issues from gemfile.lock and not all of them, which I thought was interesting, and then an issue in the routes file as well. Now it is a more limited subset. It's only like 16 issues when I run just versus current file or open files if this is the only buffer that's open. So you can see here I've got 16 issues and it includes that route file and then 12 gemfile.lock issues. There's like 30 gemfile.lock issues if you run it across the whole project though. So I just have that issue open to say, what's going on here? You know, are these the gems that are specifically invoked through the context of this particular controller? That seems a little crazy. So hopefully they can get back to us on that. But you do see the 3 pre-order controller warnings here, and they're the same ones that we saw at the command line. So if that's helpful to see it right in Vim in a quick fix window, you can do it there as well. I would think being able to just run it locally at the command line and seeing that a little bit nicer output would be sufficient because you really want to keep that to not having any output. So if it's reporting 1 or 2 things, you can see them, you can fix them, and submit your PR. So let's take a look at what we have next. All right, let's push up this to GitHub. Exclamation point gets you every time. All right, we'll push this branch up. The ZSH Hub plugin is pretty nice. Brings you right to the repo if you do hub browse. So now we've got this new branch and we can compare and pull request. It's analyzing the files. We're able to merge, that's good. You don't see any feedback here before you create the PR. I was initially thinking that the new Code Climate Chrome extension would allow you to see the feedback before you even open the PR, which would have been really nice, but that's why we're able to do everything locally. So we do have to open the PR. And you can see this is the Code Climate Chrome extension that I have here. It's reporting the master branch's score. So we'll open this pull request. So it's checking the Hound stuff because we have that configured as well. And it's checking Code Climate for us. And you can see there's this little spinner up here. It's because we have the Code Climate Chrome extension installed. I think I'm getting emails from Hound, which is another sort of noisy thing about Hound. So as soon as Code Climate finishes, we get this nice little note. We can refresh to see the latest code. So you can see Hound is mad at quite a few things here. And that actually makes sense because we haven't fully configured Hound yet. So this is sort of that situation where Hound isn't synced up with our local Rubocop config. But let's take a look at the files changed here. We should be able to see some Code Climate reporting. Okay, so here, this is right in line. It tells us that our gemfile.lock is an F. Our controller, pre-order controller went from an A to a B. This is really cool to see this stuff on a pull request with their Chrome extension. And then here's a style raise args, provide an exception class and message as an argument to raise. And then here's the Hound version. I mean, it's the exact same thing. It's just that Hound is doing it through a comment, whereas with the Chrome extension, Code Climate's able to do it in a little bit less intrusive way, which I think is pretty nice. We've got another issue, I believe, down here. Maybe not, maybe that's the only one. Let's take a look and see what it said on the conversation. Three new issues and three fixed issues. So we can pull up Code Climate's actual UI if we want to dig in a little bit deeper. So we've got that metrics ABC size again, the metrics method length, and then the raise arg. So these are the three that I left in there that I didn't fix out of the 251 that we started with so that we could see them here. And let me see. So yeah, this walks you through a little bit how to get the Chrome extension installed, how to add a repo to Code Climate. You need to have deploy keys set up. For GitHub, this is the same steps that it goes through locally. Took a screenshot of that to compare. These are our Vim options to run Code Climate inside of Vim, and then configuring Code Climate to be set up on our pull requests. Generate a token that you can add. And then the last thing is just Hound. So if you want Hound to infer your Rubocop config instead of its default one, which is the whole point of us synchronizing Rubocop in the gem file to the version that the Thoughtbot crew have deployed for Hound currently, then you just need to tell it what to do. So .hound.yml. So we'll add hound config, we'll push, come take a look at the pull request. Unfortunately, because of the way that hound works with all of its comments, you have to delete them before you repush if you want the analysis to not add them back. So in this case, I won't take the time to do that, but everything is pushed. If we scroll all the way down, it'll probably say, yep, okay, hound is still working, and now it only found one violation. So that's way better than the 12 or 14 or whatever it found in the first place. And that was simply by making sure that hound was respecting the rubocop config locally, which is right here. So excluding DB, not checking that script. The line length thing is big. Documentation is pretty big too. So yeah, unfortunately, all those hound comments are still going to be there, even though they no longer apply because the configuration is different. Another sort of disadvantage, in my opinion, of the implementation methods that they chose for that. So that is all I have prepared for configuration, getting you set up in Tmux and Vim to be able to view your test coverage locally through Cadre, SimpleCov, and another Vim plugin that shows the actual check marks in the left-hand side. We also looked at rubocop locally, running through code climate locally, and how everything looks on the PR. So if anybody has any questions, I'll hang out for a little bit on the chat and let me know if there's anything else that you'd like me to dig into.